They had the fame, the money, the mansions. Millions of fans cheered their every move. But behind the red carpets and flashing cameras, some were hiding secrets so dark they would eventually trade luxury for prison bars. Tonight we're counting down the celebrities whose shocking falls from grace left the world speechless. And trust me, the deeper we go, the darker it gets. Number 1. Danny Masterson. For years, Danny Masterson was one of television's most recognizable faces. As the wisecracking Stephen Hyde on that 70s show, he built a reputation as the cool rebel with perfect comic timing. Audiences laughed at his jokes, networks loved his popularity, and his future in Hollywood seemed secure. If fame were a high school yearbook, Danny Masterson looked destined to win, most likely to succeed. But behind the laughter and bright studio lights, a much darker story was quietly unfolding. Over time, multiple women came forward with serious allegations that would eventually spark one of Hollywood's most closely watched legal battles. The accusations shattered the image many fans thought they knew and transformed a beloved sitcom star into the center of a national controversy. As the case moved through the courts, the public watched in disbelief. The contrast was impossible to ignore. On television, Masterson had spent years making audiences laugh. In real life, he was facing allegations serious enough to threaten everything he had built. The man who once enjoyed standing ovations was now facing courtroom scrutiny. It was the kind of Hollywood plot twist no screenwriter could have sold as believable. Ultimately, Masterson was convicted and sentenced to 30 years to life in prison, marking one of the most dramatic falls from grace in recent entertainment history. Number 2. Ryan Grantham. Ryan Grantham looked like one of Hollywood's rising young talents. Viewers recognized him from appearances in popular productions, including Riverdale, where he played small but memorable roles. With a promising career ahead of him and opportunities that many aspiring actors could only dream about, Ryan seemed to be standing at the beginning of a bright future. But sometimes the most shocking stories are the ones nobody sees coming. In 2020, the entertainment world was stunned when Grantham admitted responsibility for the death of his own mother. The revelation sent shockwaves through fans and the media alike. It wasn't a tabloid rumor or a celebrity scandal destined to disappear after a few news cycles. It was a heartbreaking, real-life tragedy that instantly transformed a young actor's future into one of the most disturbing downfalls in recent memory. As details emerged, the public struggled to understand how a life that appeared so ordinary from the outside could unravel so completely. The story carried a sadness that went far beyond Hollywood headlines. There were no glamorous red carpets, no triumphant comeback tours, and no happy ending waiting around the corner. Instead, there was a family tragedy that left countless people asking the same question: how could everything go so wrong? Following legal proceedings, Grantham received a life sentence with no possibility of parole for many years. The punishment ensured that the actor who once worked in front of cameras would spend the foreseeable future far from the spotlight. Number 3. War Machine, Jonathan Koppenheuver. In the brutal world of mixed martial arts, few nicknames sounded more intimidating than War Machine. Jonathan Koppenheuver built his reputation on aggression, fearlessness, and an ability to entertain fans both inside and outside the cage. With his muscular physique, outspoken personality, and growing popularity, he seemed destined to become one of MMA's most unforgettable figures. Unfortunately, he would become unforgettable for reasons that had nothing to do with sports. While fans admired his toughness in the ring, a much darker reality was developing beyond the spotlight. In 2014, the fighter became the center of a shocking criminal case involving a violent attack on his former girlfriend, adult film star Christy Mack, and another man. The disturbing details that emerged horrified the public and instantly transformed him from a controversial athlete into one of the most notorious figures in combat sports history. What makes the story so tragic is how completely it destroyed everything he had worked to build. In MMA, fighters are paid to unleash controlled aggression. Outside the cage, however, there are rules no championship belt can excuse breaking. War Machine spent years cultivating an image of being dangerous. The problem was that eventually, the character seemed to consume the man behind it. Following a highly publicized trial, Koppenhaver received a sentence that could keep him behind bars for decades. The once rising fighter who dreamed of fame, fortune, and championship glory now faces a future far removed from roaring arenas and cheering fans. Number 4. Amy Locane. Amy Locane once seemed to have everything Hollywood promises. With her striking beauty, undeniable talent, and memorable role in Melrose Place, she looked destined for a long and glamorous career. The cameras loved her, fans adored her, and the future appeared wide open. But as history has shown, time and time again, fame can be a fragile thing. Sometimes it takes only one terrible decision to erase years of success. On a tragic night in 2010, that decision changed everything. While driving under the influence, Locane became involved in a devastating crash that claimed the life of a young woman and left another person seriously injured. In an instant, the bright lights of Hollywood were replaced by flashing police sirens. The actress who once walked red carpets now found herself at the center of a heartbreaking legal battle that dominated headlines for years. What makes the story even more shocking is how ordinary the mistake seemed at first. No elaborate conspiracy, no secret criminal empire, just one reckless choice that spiraled into irreversible tragedy. It's a sobering reminder that sometimes the smallest moment of bad judgment can create the biggest disaster. As the saying goes, life doesn't come with a rewind button, and Amy Locane learned that lesson in the harshest way imaginable. After years of legal proceedings, she was ultimately sentenced to prison, a punishment that permanently transformed her public image. Number 5. Michael Jace. For years, Michael Jace built a career playing authority figures on television. Best known for portraying a tough and disciplined police officer on The Shield, he projected an image of control, confidence, and reliability. To millions of viewers, he looked like the kind of man who always knew right from wrong. But as Hollywood has repeatedly proven, what happens behind closed doors can be very different from what appears on screen. In May 2014, that carefully crafted image shattered in a single horrifying night. At his Los Angeles home, an argument escalated into a tragedy that would leave the nation stunned. The incident unfolded in front of the couple's young children, adding another heartbreaking layer to an already devastating story. Suddenly, the actor known for enforcing justice on television was facing justice himself. The case quickly dominated headlines. Fans who had watched him for years struggled to reconcile the character they admired with the man standing in a courtroom. It was one of those shocking moments that reminded everyone that fame doesn't magically make personal problems disappear. In fact, sometimes celebrity only makes the fall more public. One day, you're recognized for your work on television. The next, your name is attached to a story no publicist in the world could ever fix. After a lengthy legal process, Jace was sentenced to 40 years in prison. The sentence effectively closed the door on the life and career he once knew. Number 6. Joe Sun. At one point, Joe Sun looked like a man living several dreams at once. He fought in MMA, appeared in Hollywood productions, and even landed a memorable role in Austin Powers. With his intimidating size and larger-than-life personality, he seemed perfectly built for action movies. If you had asked fans back then where Joe Son was headed, prison would have been the last answer anyone expected. But behind the spotlight lurked a dark past waiting to catch up with him. Years after enjoying fame in both sports and entertainment, DNA, evidence connected Son to a brutal crime that had remained unresolved for years. The revelation stunned the public. Suddenly, the man audiences remembered from movie screens was no longer being discussed for his acting career or fighting skills. Instead, headlines focused on a horrifying case that exposed a far darker reality. What followed was a dramatic collapse, unlike anything Hollywood could have scripted. The courts handed down a life sentence, effectively ending any chance of returning to the life he once knew. Yet the story somehow became even more shocking. Even after entering prison, Son continued to make headlines for violent behavior behind bars, proving that the chaos surrounding his life had not ended at sentencing. There's a strange irony in Joe Son's downfall. In movies, villains usually get defeated in 2 hours and the credits roll. Real life doesn't work that way. For Joe Son, the consequences kept coming long after the cameras stopped rolling. Number 7. Skylar DeLeon. If Hollywood ever produced a script too dark to believe, it might look a lot like the story of Skylar DeLeon. As a teenager, he briefly appeared in the Power Rangers universe and dreamed of building a future in entertainment. It wasn't a major role, but it was enough to place him within touching distance of the fame that so many people spend their lives chasing. Unfortunately, that dream would eventually be overshadowed by a crime so shocking that it continues to haunt true crime fans decades later. The case centered on Tom and Jackie Hawks, a retired couple who had worked hard their entire lives and were looking forward to peaceful years ahead. Instead, they became victims of an elaborate scheme driven by greed. Authorities revealed that DeLeon and his accomplices gained the couple's trust before luring them onto their yacht. What happened next sounded less like reality and more like a nightmare pulled from a thriller movie. As investigators uncovered the details, public outrage exploded. The horrifying plan, carried out with chilling calculation, stunned even seasoned detectives. Every new revelation seemed darker than the last. The young man who once dreamed of life in front of cameras was now making headlines for entirely different reasons. In the end, the courtroom became the final stage of Skylar DeLeon's story. His freedom vanished, replaced by a future behind bars. It's a tragic reminder that greed can be one of the most destructive forces imaginable. Number 8. Mel Hall. For much of the 1980s and early 1990s, Mel Hall was living the dream that countless young athletes chase. As a talented Major League Baseball outfielder, he played under the bright lights of professional sports, thrilled fans with his powerful swing, and earned the admiration that comes with competing at the highest level. To many, Hall appeared to be another success story, a gifted athlete who had turned talent into fame and fortune. But after the cheers faded and his playing days ended, a far darker chapter began to unfold. Years after leaving professional baseball, Hall became the focus of serious criminal allegations involving inappropriate relationships with underage girls. Prosecutors argued that the misconduct stretched across several years and occurred while Hall used his position of trust and influence around youth sports programs. The accusations stunned former fans who remembered him as a baseball star rather than a criminal defendant. As the case moved through the courts, disturbing details emerged that transformed public perception of the former athlete. The man who once stepped onto baseball fields packed with cheering crowds was now facing a jury instead of opposing pitchers. It was a dramatic and tragic fall from grace. In sports, players often talk about making errors and getting another chance the next inning. In real life, some mistakes carry consequences that last forever. Ultimately, Hall was convicted and sentenced to 45 years in prison. The punishment effectively ended any hope of rebuilding his public image. Number 9. Harvey Weinstein. For decades, Harvey Weinstein was one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. As a legendary producer behind countless award-winning films, he had the rare ability to turn unknown actors into stars and small movies into Oscar contenders. In an industry built on dreams, Weinstein often seemed like the man holding the keys to the kingdom. If Hollywood were a chessboard, he wasn't just a player, he was one of the people moving the pieces. But power can be a dangerous thing when it goes unchecked. For years, rumors quietly circulated behind the scenes, whispers that many people were afraid to challenge. Then, in 2017, everything exploded. One by one, women came forward with allegations that shocked the entertainment industry and triggered a global reckoning. Suddenly, the producer who had spent decades shaping Hollywood narratives became the center of a story he could no longer control. The fallout was swift and historic. Studios cut ties. Industry friends disappeared. Awards and honors that once symbolized success became reminders of a spectacular downfall. It was one of the most dramatic collapses of power modern Hollywood had ever witnessed. The man who once sat in the front row at premieres now found himself sitting in courtrooms. That's a career change no agent wants to negotiate. After multiple trials, Weinstein received lengthy prison sentences in New York and California. The punishment effectively ensured that the remainder of his life would be defined not by blockbuster films, but by criminal convictions. His downfall became a symbol of accountability and a turning point in entertainment history. Number 10. O.J. Simpson. Few celebrities have ever experienced a rise and fall as dramatic as O.J. Simpson. Before controversy consumed his legacy, Simpson was an American icon. He dominated the NFL, became a beloved sports broadcaster, starred in Hollywood films, and appeared in commercials that made him one of the most recognizable faces in the country. To millions of fans, he seemed to have it all: fame, fortune, charisma, and a smile that could sell almost anything. Then came 1994. The deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman triggered one of the most sensational criminal cases in modern history. Television networks interrupted regular programming. Millions watched every development. The trial became a national obsession, turning court proceedings into must-see television. Families gathered around their TVs not for a championship game, but for courtroom drama. It was a spectacle unlike anything America had ever seen. Although Simpson was acquitted in the criminal trial, the controversy never truly disappeared. Years later, a civil jury found him liable for the wrongful deaths, ensuring that questions and debates would follow him for the rest of his life. The once celebrated sports hero had become one of the most polarizing figures in America. Then came another shocking chapter. In 2008, Simpson was convicted for his role in an armed robbery incident in Las Vegas and sentenced to prison. The irony was impossible to ignore. The man who had escaped prison in the most famous trial of the century ultimately ended up behind bars for an entirely different crime. After serving 9 years, he was released in 2017. Yet his story remains one of the most extraordinary celebrity downfalls ever witnessed, a tale of fame, controversy, courtroom drama, and a legacy forever divided between athletic greatness and the scandals that overshadowed it. Number 11. Ian Watkins. At the height of his fame, Ian Watkins seemed to have everything a rock star could want. As the lead singer of the Welsh band Lost Prophets, he performed before massive crowds, sold millions of records, and built a loyal fan base across the world. His band's songs dominated rock radio throughout the 2000s, and fans saw him as a charismatic frontman living the dream. From the outside, it looked like a classic success story. But behind the music, a far darker reality was waiting to be exposed. When authorities launched an investigation, the revelations shocked even seasoned investigators. The allegations against Watkins were so disturbing that they immediately became one of the most infamous scandals in music history. Fans who had spent years singing along to his songs suddenly found themselves unable to comprehend the person behind the microphone. The man they thought they knew was gone, replaced by headlines that grew more horrifying with every new detail. The case dominated news coverage and sent shockwaves throughout the entertainment world. Fellow musicians publicly distanced themselves. Former fans destroyed merchandise and erased music collections. It was as if an entire career vanished overnight. One day he was standing on stage under bright concert lights. The next, he was sitting in a courtroom facing the consequences of his actions. That's a career transition no rock star puts on a bucket list. Ultimately, Watkins received a lengthy prison sentence reflecting the seriousness of his crimes. His fall from grace remains one of the most shocking in modern music history. Number 12. Suge Knight. In the world of hip-hop, few names carried as much power, fear, and influence as Suge Knight. As the co-founder of Death Row Records, he helped launch the careers of rap legends and shaped an entire era of West Coast music. During the 1990s, Suge seemed untouchable. He wasn't just part of the music industry, he was one of the men helping run it. When Suge Knight walked into a room, people noticed. Some out of admiration, others out of pure survival instinct. But power has a way of creating the illusion that consequences only happen to other people. For years, Knight's name was surrounded by controversy, legal troubles, and rumors of violence. Still, he remained a towering figure in the entertainment world. Then came 2015, the year everything finally collapsed. Following a confrontation in Compton, Knight was involved in a fatal hit-and-run incident that shocked both the music industry and the public. The fall was stunning. The man who once sat atop a multi-million-dollar empire suddenly found himself fighting for freedom instead of record deals. Headlines that once celebrated platinum albums now focused on court hearings and criminal charges. It was a dramatic reversal worthy of a Hollywood crime drama, except this story was painfully real. Eventually, Knight accepted a plea agreement that resulted in a 28-year prison sentence. The punishment marked the end of one of the most powerful and controversial careers in music history. Number 13. Elizabeth Holmes. At one point, Elizabeth Holmes was being compared to Steve Jobs. Dressed in black turtlenecks, speaking with absolute confidence, and promising to revolutionize healthcare, she became Silicon Valley's golden child. Investors poured in hundreds of millions of dollars. Politicians, business leaders, and media outlets celebrated her as the future of medicine. By her early 30s, she was one of the youngest self-made billionaires in America. It seemed like nothing could stop her rise. Her company Theranos claimed it could perform hundreds of medical tests using only a few drops of blood. The promise sounded almost magical. Unfortunately, reality had a nasty habit of asking difficult questions. As journalists and investigators began digging deeper, cracks started appearing in the carefully crafted image. Those revolutionary breakthroughs that had attracted so much attention, many simply didn't work as advertised. What followed was one of the most spectacular corporate collapses in modern history. The woman once featured on magazine covers as a visionary entrepreneur suddenly found herself facing accusations of misleading investors. The startup, once valued at billions, became a symbol of hype deception and unchecked ambition. Silicon Valley loves stories about changing the world. This became a story about what happens when the promise is bigger than the proof. After years of investigations and courtroom battles, Holmes was convicted on fraud-related charges and sentenced to prison. The transformation was astonishing. One day, she was speaking on global stages about the future. The next, she was preparing for life behind bars. Number 14. Aaron Hernandez. Aaron Hernandez seemed to be living the ultimate American dream. A gifted athlete with extraordinary talent, he rose from a promising college football star to a key player for the New England Patriots. He signed a multi-million-dollar contract, played alongside some of the biggest names in the NFL, and appeared destined for a long career filled with championships, endorsements, and fame. From the outside, it looked like he had everything. But sometimes the brightest spotlight hides the darkest shadows. Behind the success, however, trouble was quietly brewing. In 2013, the sports world was rocked when Hernandez was arrested in connection with the death of Odin Lloyd, a semi-professional football player and acquaintance. The news exploded across television screens and newspaper headlines. Fans who had cheered his touchdowns suddenly found themselves watching courtroom footage instead of game highlights. The fall was as dramatic as it was shocking. As the trial unfolded, details emerged that painted a picture far different from the smiling athlete fans thought they knew. The man once expected to become one of football's biggest stars was now fighting for his freedom. In a twist that seemed ripped from a Hollywood crime drama, his NFL career ended almost overnight. One minute you're catching touchdown passes in front of 70,000 screaming fans. The next, your biggest audience is sitting in a courtroom. In 2015, Hernandez was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Yet the story didn't end there. Just days after being acquitted in a separate case, he was found dead in his prison cell, leaving behind countless unanswered questions and endless speculation. Number 15. Corey Miller C. Murder. Before prison bars became part of his story. Corey Miller, better known to millions as C. Murder, was one of the biggest names in Southern hip-hop. As a member of the famous No Limit Records empire, founded by his brother Master P, he helped define an era of rap music. His albums sold millions, his songs dominated the streets, and his future looked brighter than ever. In the late 1990s, C. Murder wasn't just making records, he was building a legacy. Then everything changed. In 2002, a fatal incident at a Louisiana nightclub placed the rapper at the center of a criminal case that would divide public opinion for decades. Authorities accused him in connection with the death of a 16-year-old fan, and the case quickly became one of the most controversial legal battles in hip-hop history. Supporters argued that mistakes were made during the investigation, while prosecutors insisted the evidence told a different story. The courtroom drama stretched on for years, turning what should have been a music career into a legal nightmare. As appeals came and went, Murder continued to maintain his innocence. Family members, celebrities, and supporters launched campaigns calling for a review of the case. Yet despite the controversy, the conviction remained in place. The man who once performed before thousands of cheering fans now faced a future behind prison walls. There's a tragic irony to his story. In rap music, artists often tell stories about surviving danger and overcoming impossible odds. But for Corey Miller, real life became far more complicated than any lyric he ever recorded. Number 16. Mark Rogowski. In the 1980s, Mark Rogowski was skateboarding royalty. Known to fans simply as Gator, he became one of the biggest stars in the rapidly growing skateboarding world. Sponsorship deals poured and magazines featured him on their covers, and young skaters across America wanted to be just like him. At his peak, Rogowski wasn't just riding the wave of popularity, he was helping define an entire generation of skate culture. But fame can be a dangerous thing when a person's life begins to unravel behind the scenes. As skateboarding evolved in the late 1980s, Rogowski struggled to adapt to the sport's changing style and culture. The attention that once followed him everywhere slowly began to fade. For an athlete whose identity was deeply tied to success, the decline was devastating. Friends later described a man battling emotional turmoil, personal frustrations, and a growing sense that his best days were behind him. Then came the shocking crime that stunned the nation. In 1991, Rogowski became involved in the death of Jessica Bergstein, a case that horrified both the skateboarding community and the public. The details were disturbing, and the revelation that one of the sport's biggest icons could be connected to such a tragedy left fans in disbelief. The man who once inspired thousands of young skateboarders suddenly became the focus of criminal headlines. After confessing, Rogowski was convicted and sentenced to decades in prison. The fall was staggering. One day, he was a hero soaring above ramps and half-pipes. The next, he was facing a future behind bars. It's a tragic reminder that success, fame, and talent cannot protect someone from the consequences of destructive choices.